The narration in the earliest Maqtal of Abu Mikhnaf tells us that after Imam Hussein bin Ali alayhi salam had been martyred, the riwayah says, وَمَالَ النَّاسُ عَلَى نِسَاءِ الْحُسَيْنِ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ وَثَقَلِهِ وَمَتَاعِهِ وَالْوَرَسِ وَالْحُلَلِ وَالْإِبِلِ فَانْتَهَبُوهَا. Today a day has come when people from his own ummah want to trample the body of Al-Hussein alayhi salam beneath the hooves of the horses. هذا الحسين بالعراء. This is Al-Hussein lying on the plains, مُرَمَّلٌ بِالدِّمَاء. And then he talks about the burial of the ashab of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and Imam Hussein alayhi salam himself. This is when you start seeing the emergence of these reports that claim that Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam miraculously somehow, through some supernatural mechanism, freed himself from captivity and came all the way to Karbala. There are other fabricated narratives that are associated with Sham Ghariba. I think, as you will see, there's no mention of them in the earliest and most authoritative sources. For example, the coming of Imam Ali alayhi salam. There is this whole dramatic episode that is usually recited by the Dhakirin. In the middle of the night, she sees a horseman coming towards her, and she calls out to that horseman and she says, "Stop, don't come here. The children have just, fallen asleep," and the horseman doesn't listen to her. So this whole, the way they dramatized it, Imam Ali alayhi salam, even if you look at it from the point of view of common sense and logic, when he talks about Sayyidah Sakina, or Sukaina was her title. Her actual name was Amina, and some say it was Amina or Umayma. According to the learned Tahqiqi view, she was around 11, 12 years old. She used to narrate hadith, and yes, she did survive Karbala, contrary to popular perception. It's very popular among the people that Bibi Sukaina passed away in Sham and was buried in Sham. It's like 6 to 7 centuries after the event of Karbala is the first time we have a claim that Imam Hussein has a little daughter who is buried in Sham. Or when she was going from Kufa or on the way, she fell from the camel, and Sayyidah Fatima Zahra salamullahi alayha miraculously appeared. He says, "Salamu alaykum wa alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh." The narrations that come of Sayyidah Sukaina having a dream of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and dying the next day, where do these come from? Also, will you be covering the events of the Ahlul Bayt in the courtyard of Yazid? أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وهو خير ناصر ومعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. أما بعد, my respected elders, my dearest youngsters, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In the previous session, we were going over the Maqtal of Al-Imam Abu Abdullah Al-Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salatu wassalam, the beloved grandson of our beloved messenger Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. We saw the brutal and merciless manner in which his blood was shed, and in which he and his family members and his loyal companions met with their martyrdom. Tonight is a night that is traditionally referred to as Sham Ghariban. It is a night in which the family, the children of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, find themselves orphaned. His wives have been widowed, and the women folk of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam are upon the threshold of new trials and tribulations that are going to befall them as they fall into captivity. The narration in the earliest Maqtal of Abu Mikhnaf tells us that after Imam Hussein bin Ali alayhi salam had been martyred, the riwayah says, وَمَالَ النَّاسُ عَلَى نِسَاءِ الْحُسَيْنِ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ وَثَقَلِهِ وَمَتَاعِهِ وَالْوَرَسِ وَالْحُلَلِ وَالْإِبِلِ فَانْتَهَبُوهَا. That after they were done killing Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the soldiers from the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, they attacked the tents of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and they proceeded to plunder and loot what was in the tents. And so they assaulted the women of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and they looted and plundered whatever they could find in the tents of the Imam, of his possessions, and also of the jewelry of the women and their possessions. They took control of the camels and animals. And they even assaulted the woman. It's mentioned, وَإِنْ كَانَتِ الْمَرْأَةُ تُنَازَعُ ثَوْبُهَا عَنْ ظَهْرِهَا. There were some men seen seizing or snatching the coverings from the backs of some of the women, حَتَّى تُغْلَبَ عَلَيْهِ وَيُذْهَبُ بِهِ مِنْهَا. And at times, the men would succeed in removing some of the coverings. The riwayah in the Maqtal then goes on to talk about how Sinan ibn Anas, who was the one who is accused and guilty of beheading Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he was told to go to the rulers or to go to the people in authority and demand the greatest possible reward for this, because it was said to him that you have killed the most important and influential man of the Arabs. He had come here, جاء إلى هؤلاء يريد أن يزيلهم عن ملكهم. He was going to overthrow the Umayyads from their kingdom. So you should go to your commanders and you should seek reward from them. And if they were to give you the entire public treasury as compensation, it would still be little. And so the riwayah mentions how he came and stood in front of the tent of Umar bin Sa'd, and he recited lines of poetry in which he boasts about having killed Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He says, أوق الركاب فضة وذهبا أنا قتلت الملك المحجب قتلت خير الناس أما وأبا وخيرهم إذ ينسبون نسبا. He says, fill my coffers with gold and silver, because I am the one who has killed the veiled king. I have killed the one whose mother and father are the best of people, and he himself is the best of people in as far as his genealogy is concerned. And at that point, Umar ibn Sa'd said, bring him inside the tent. And then he struck him with a stick and he said, you are a madman. You are speaking in this manner, referring to Imam Hussein alayhi salam as the best of the people. If Ibn Ziyad hears you, he's going to kill you. And then the riwayah in the Maqtal also mentions how Shimr ibn Ziljawshan, together with his infantry, they also assaulted the tents of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. They came upon Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein, and he's referred to as Al-Asghar because he is among the youngest of those who survived from among the sons of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And he was ill on that day, and he was lying on the bed, on the floor of the tent. And so there was some talk about killing him, to which Humayd ibn Muslim claims that he said, Subhanallah, نقتل الصبيان, are we going to kill young lads? إنما هذا صبي, this son is very young. And then they say Umar ibn Sa'd came, he intervened, and he said that this young lad is sick, so no one should touch him. No one should go into the tents of the women, and whoever has taken any of the possessions should return them. But no one returned any possession. And that's the point at which it is mentioned that Umar ibn Sa'd addressed Uqba bin Sim'an, and he said, Ma anta, what are you? And Uqba bin Sim'an responded by saying, Ana Abdul Mamluk, I'm just a slave who is owned by the people here. فَخَلَّ سَبِيلَهُ, so Umar ibn Sa'd let him go. فَلَمْ يَنْجُ أَحَدٌ مِّنْهُمْ غَيْرُهُ. And so they say there was among the males, there was no one else who survived among those who had come with Imam Hussein alayhi salam other than him and Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam and others. Another very harrowing event that is mentioned in the Maqtal, and this is mentioned even in the earliest Maqtal, is the incident whereby the body of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, even after he had been so brutally martyred, Umar ibn Sa'ad nada fi ashabih. He called out to his soldiers, Man yantadibu lil Husayni wa yuwatti'hu farasahu. Who is going to volunteer to crush Al-Hussein under the hooves of the horses? Imagine, this is the blessed grandson of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the body that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to carry, and he used to place on his back at times, and he used to play with Al-Hussein alayhi salam and kiss him on his cheeks and all over his body. And yet today a day has come when people from his own ummah want to trample the body of Al-Hussein alayhi salam beneath the hooves of the horses. And so when Umar ibn Sa'ad made this call, he cried out to his army and asked for volunteers. فَانْتَدَبَ عَشَرَةً. The riwayah says 10 of the horsemen agreed. They volunteered for this. And their names are given as Ishaq bin Huya al-Habrami, Ahbash ibn al-Marthid al-Habrami, and others. So they came and they trampled upon the body of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein with the horses, حَتَّى رَضُّوا ظَهْرَهُ وَصَدْرَهُ, until they crushed his back and his chest. And then it talks about how Umar ibn Sa'ad led Salatul Janazah. He prayed over those on his side who had been killed, and he buried them. And then he ordered the head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam on that very same day to be taken. He gave it to Khawli bin Yazid to take it to Ubaidillah bin Ziyad. And Khawli came to the door of the palace, but he found the door of the palace closed. So he went to his house and he stored the head over there for one day. Here in the footnotes, the reasoning behind why the body of Al-Hussein alayhi salam was crushed and trampled underneath the hooves of the horses, that reason is given. And the reason is that Ubaidillah bin Ziyad had written to Umar ibn Sa'ad saying, فَإِن قُتِلَ الْحُسَيْنِ فَأَوْطِئِ الْخَيْلَ صَدْرَهُ وَظَهْرَهُ. He had sent instructions to Umar ibn Sa'ad saying that if Al-Hussein gets killed, then make sure you trample his chest and his back with the horses. فَإِنَّهُ عَاقٌ شَاقٌ, because he's a rebel. And so we have to humiliate him and debase him. قَاطِعٌ ظَلُومٌ, he's someone who has severed the ties, he's an oppressor. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ وَلَيْسَ دَهْرِي فِي هَذَا أَنْ يُضَرَّ بَعْدَ الْمَوْتِ شَيْئًا وَلَكِنْ عَلَيَّ قَوْلٌ لَوْ قَدْ قُلْتُهُ فَعَلْتُ بِهِ هَذَا. He said, and I'm typically not the kind of person who tries to harm people after their death, but this is something that I've taken as an oath upon myself, and I've said it, so it has to be done. In any case, after that, we have the incident of the family of Imam Hussein alayhi salam being taken to Kufa. They say Umar ibn Sa'ad remained on the day of Ashura and on the night that followed it in Karbala, and he stayed until the next morning. After that, he had the heads of the shuhada. Their heads were severed from their bodies, and so there were 72 heads that Umar ibn Sa'ad sent together with Shimr ibn al-Jawshan and Qais ibn al-Ash'ath and Amr ibn al-Hajjaj and Uzrat ibn Qais al-Ahmasi. And so they arrived with those heads into the palace of Ubaidillah bin Ziyad after that. And that is when the announcement was made that they were going to be heading to Kufa. Together with them, the daughters of Al-Hussein alayhi salam and his sisters, and those who were with him from his children. And also Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein alayhi salam, Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, who was sick, he was also taken. And as they were being taken, they were made to pass by the place where the bodies of the shuhada and Imam Hussein alayhi salam were lying on the plains of Karbala. And so Qurrat ibn Qais al-Tamimi reports, he says, La ansa Zainab ibnata Fatima. I can still not forget how Zainab, the daughter of Fatima, when she passed by the body of her brother Al-Hussein and she saw him lying there on the plains of Karbala. He had not been buried. At that point, she called out, Ya Muhammadah, Ya Muhammadah, out of grief She said, Ya Muhammada, Ya Muhammada, Salla alayka malaikatus sama. She addresses the Prophet here, but again, this is not, this is a poetic address. It is not an address with the belief that the Prophet can hear this or that he can help, but rather this is out of expression of grief. She says, Ya Muhammada, Ya Muhammada, Salla alayka malaikatus sama. You are the one over whom the angels of the heavens prayed. هذا الحسين بالعراء. This is Al-Hussein lying on the plains, مرمل بالدماء. His body is stained with the blood of martyrdom. مقطع الأعضاء. They have cut up his body. يا محمدا وبناتك سبايا. Your daughters are being taken as captives. وذريتك مقتلة. Your offspring has been killed and the breeze is blowing over them. And this tragic cry of Sayyidah Zainab salamullahi alayha, the narrator says, فَأَبْكَتْ وَاللَّهِ كُلَّ عَدُوٍ وَصَدِيقٍ. It made every enemy and friend cry. وَصِحْنَ النِّسْوَى وَلَطَمْنَ وُجُوهَهُنَّ. And the women folk also cried and they struck their faces. وَدُفِنَ الْحُسَيْنِ أو وَدَفَنَ الْحُسَيْنِ وَأَصْحَابَهُ أَهْلُ الْغَاضِرِيَّةِ مِنْ بَنِي أَسَدٍ بَعْدَمَا قُتِلُوا بِيَوْمٍ. And then it talks about the burial of the ashab of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and Imam Hussein alayhi salam himself. And that, according to the earliest, most authoritative sources, was carried out by Ahlul Ghadiriya. Ghadiriya was the village near Karbala, and the Banu Asad used to dwell were dwelling in that place. And so one day after the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, they came, and when they saw the bodies lying on the plains, they were the ones who undertook the burial. And so in As-Sahih min Maqtal Sayyid al-Shuhada, you also have these reports from Tarikh al-Tabari, from Hamid ibn Muslim. دفن الحسين وأصحابه أهل الغاضرية من بني أسد بعدما قتلوا بيوم. The people of Ghadiriya from among the Banu Asad were the ones who buried Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam after he was killed, one day after he was killed. This is also confirmed by Al-Baladhuri in Ansab al-Ashraf. He says, دفن أهل الغاضرية من بني أسد جثة الحسين. The body of al-Hussein was buried by the people of Ghadiriya from the Banu Asad. وَدَفَنُوا جُثَثَ أَصْحَابِهِ رَحِمَهُمُ اللَّهِ بَعْدَمَا قُتِلُوا بِيَوْمٍ. And they also buried the bodies of his companions one day after they were killed. And this is also further confirmed by Ibn Shahr Ashub in the Manaqib, that their bodies were buried by Ahlul Ghadiriya, the people of the Banu Asad. And so this is how Sayyid ibn Tawus also in his Luhuf, Al-Malhuf or Al-Luhuf, he confirms that after Ibn Sa'ad had left Karbala, the army of Yazid had left, the Banu Asad came, they offered prayers over the pure bodies of the Shuhada, and then they buried them at the location where they are found today. This is also mentioned in Al-Akhbar Al-Tiwal, Muruj al-Dhahab, Maqtal al-Hussein by Al-Khwarizmi, Al-Tabaqat al-Kubra. So all the earliest sources, they do confirm and mention that Imam Hussein alayhi salam was buried by the Banu Asad. Later on, when this became a theological issue, and some of the later sectarian elements came up with the concept that only an imam can bury an imam, and only an imam can lead the funeral prayer of an imam. This is when you start seeing the emergence of these reports that claim that Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam miraculously somehow, through some supernatural mechanism, freed himself from captivity and came all the way to Karbala, and he's the one who oversaw the burial of Imam Hussein and his ashab. But it is clear that these narratives are anachronistic, they are ahistorical, they have no basis in the earliest and most reliable sources, and even theologically speaking, it doesn't make sense. Protecting the life of the Imam is much more important than ensuring his burial. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to give supernatural powers, He would give it to the Imam to protect his life. He didn't give the Imam supernatural powers to protect his life, but somehow He would give it he did not give Imam Hussein alayhi salam those supernatural powers to protect his life, but somehow he would give supernatural powers to Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam to go and bury the body. This theologically also does not make sense. And the only reason why this whole thing came up was because in the later period, this concept was developed that only an imam can bury an imam, and the fact that the one who buries the imam and the one who prays Salatul Janazah, that was, people started to see that as a sign of a person's imamah. So because of that, these narratives were developed. But it is quite clear that from the historical point of view, such narratives are definitely fabricated. Other than that, there are other fabricated narratives that are associated with Sham Ghariba. I think, as you will see, there's no mention of them in the earliest and most authoritative sources. For example, the coming of Imam Ali alayhi salam. There is this whole dramatic episode that is usually recited by the Dhakirin on the night of Sham Ghariba, about how Imam Ali alayhi salam, Bibi Zainab salamullahi alayha was guarding the children, and she was standing guard, and sometime at night, in the middle of the night, she sees a horseman coming towards her, and she calls out to that horseman and she says, "Stop, don't come here. The children have just, fallen asleep," and the horseman doesn't listen to her. So this whole, the way they dramatized it, Imam Ali alayhi salam, even if you look at it from the point of view of common sense and logic, why would Imam Ali alayhi salam torture his daughter in this manner? Because in the dramatized account that they relate, she keeps on pleading with the horseman not to advance towards her, but the horseman still keeps on advancing, and she says, "Please don't come, and the children have just slept," and this and that, and the horseman does not listen to her, and he keeps coming and coming and coming until finally, when he removes his mask or his veil, that's when she recognizes that it is Imam Ali alayhi salam, and then she cries to him and says, "Baba, where were you when Aun and Muhammad were killed, and Al-Qasim was killed, and Ali al-Akbar, and Al-Abbas, and Al-Husayn alayhi salam?" And so obviously, these are ahistorical, fabricated narratives. They are products of people's imagination. And it is clear that the purpose of narrating these incidents is just to ensure that people cry more and more. It's to elicit tears. But these kinds of false narratives actually are a disservice to the Karbala, to the saga, the tragic saga of Karbala. What happened on this night, and the manner in which the tents were attacked, and the coverings were snatched, and the jewelry was seized from the women folk of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and the manner in which they were treated, that in itself is sufficient to induce grief, even in the coldest of hearts. So one is not in need of any fabricated narratives and any dramatized, imagined scenarios in order to bolster that grief. With regard to the original sources, another thing that we may clarify at this point is about the daughter of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, who is Bibi Sakina. And so this is Ayatollah al-Sheikh Muhammad al-Rayshahri. This is his book, Maqtal Sayyid al-Shuhada. When he talks about Sayyida Sakina, or Sukaina was her title. Her actual name was Amina, and some say it was Amina or Umayma. And Sukaina was just the laqab which her mother used to call her with. Her mother was Rabab bint Imr al-Qais al-Kalbi. This daughter of Imam Hussein alayhi salam was born in Medina. It is estimated that she was born around 47, the 47th year of Hijrah, some say 51st year of Hijrah. So contrary to popular perception, she was not 3 or 4 years old at the time the event of Karbala happened. Rather, according to the learned tahqiqi view, she was around 11, 12 years old. And Fatima, the daughter of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, was elder to Sakina. And Ayatollah Sheikh Muhammad Ray Shahri mentions that both Sakina and Fatima were of marriageable age by the cultural standards of those times. And that's why it has appeared in some of the sources that Imam Hussein alayhi salam had offered Al-Hasan al-Muthanna the hand of either of his daughters in marriage. So he had said, you can either marry Fatima or you can marry Sakina, whichever you want. And so Bibi Sakina, salamullahi alayha, is known to have had a very good akhlaq. She was known for her beauty and her chastity. She was a woman of letters. She was among the people of poetry and literature. She used to narrate hadith. And yes, she did survive Karbala, contrary to popular perception. It's very popular among the people that Bibi Sakina passed away in Sham and was buried in Sham. But according to Ayatollah Sheikh Muhammad Ray Shahri, this is not the case. And what he's saying is actually confirmed by most of the earliest sources and books of history. They confirm that she survived Karbala and she was a woman of letters, and people used to attend her majlis. Some of the notable dignitaries of Quraysh and some of the great poets and men and women of letters used to attend. And she was actually also married. She first married her cousin, Abdullah bin al-Hasan, the son of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. And Abdullah bin Hassan was martyred with Imam Abu Abdullah al-Hussein in Karbala. And they say that he was martyred before she could move in with him, while others say that no, she had actually moved in with him. And she was, for all purposes, his wife at the time the event of Karbala happened. And then, according to other sources, after Abdullah bin Hassan, her first husband was Mus'ab bin Zubayr. And after him, she married other men as well, such as Abdullah bin Hassan bin Affan, Mus'ab bin Zubayr, Abdullah bin Uthman bin Abdullah, Zayd bin Amr bin Uthman bin Affan, Ibrahim bin Abdurrahman bin Auf, Al-Asbagh bin Abdullah bin Marwan, and many other such sources. They confirm this. So Sayyidah Sakina was present. She witnessed the event of Karbala. She was taken captive to Kufa and to Sham. And from there, she did return to Medina, according to Sheikh Muhammad Ray Shahri and most of the earliest sources on which he's relying. And according to the historical sources, she died in the year 117 AH. So she lived for a very long time after the event of Karbala. And she was buried not in Sham, but in Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara, as far as the popular opinion is concerned. It has been mentioned that she was buried in Sham and Makkah and other places, but the more established and popular view is that she was buried in Medina. And then he also has a study, a research-based study into the other character, the other daughter that is attributed to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, who is Sayyidah Ruqayya. So some people think that she was the 3-year-old or the 4-year-old who was there in Karbala. But Sheikh Muhammad Ray Shahri goes on to say that there are some critical observations with regard to Sayyidah Ruqayya being the daughter of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and also in the manner of her alleged death in Sham. And also there is a grave site, a shrine in Sham that is attributed to Sayyidah Ruqayya. And so he has this whole study in which he argues that there really is not very strong evidence to suggest that Imam Hussein alayhi salam had any daughter by the name of Ruqayya. His daughters were Fatima, Sakina, Zainab, Kulthum. Although the evidence for Zainab and Kulthum is very scant, it's very little because they probably died in their infancy. So the only famous and known daughters of Imam Hussein alayhi salam are Fatima and Sakina. All right? And he mentions that most of the people who list the daughters of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, they do not even mention Ruqayya. There is mention of Sayyidah Ruqayya in the Maqtal of Sayyid ibn Tawus when Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Now obviously this is a 7th century, it's a very late source. And so they say when Imam Hussein alayhi salam was bidding farewell to his Ahlul Bayt, he called out, Ya Uqtah, Ya Kulthum, wa anti ya Zainab, wa anti ya Ruqayya, wa anti ya Fatima, wa anti ya Rabab. He called out to the women folk. And so Ruqayya is mentioned there. But the Sheikh Al-Rayshahri says that this text is not found in many of the manuscripts of Sayyid ibn Tawus's Maqtal, which is entitled Al-Malhuf. And in this riwayah on its own is not even sufficient to prove that she's the daughter of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Because it is entirely possible that this Ruqayya here is Ruqayya, the daughter of Imam Ali alayhi salam, who was married to Muslim bin Aqil. And so because the children of Muslim bin Aqil had accompanied Imam Hussein, it is entirely probable that his wife, Sayyidah Ruqayya binti Ali, was also together with her. And then he goes on to dissect and study this claim that there is a small daughter, a little daughter of Imam Hussein alayhi salam who was buried in Sham. And again, he goes on to say that, look, the very first source that has any mention of this is written by an author who died in the year 700 AH. So it's like 6 to 7 centuries after the event of Karbala is the first time we have a claim that Imam Hussein has a little daughter who is buried in Sham. Other than that, the earliest sources, they provide us with so many rich details of what happened in Karbala, in Kufa, in Sham. They mention no such little daughter, 3 or 4-year-old daughter that died in Sham. So he analyzes this report, which is found in this 8th century or 7th century source. And then he talks about how it's also mentioned in Rawdatul Shuhada by Mullah Hussein al-Kashifi. But then he's again a 10th century source. So he's not exactly a very early, reliable, authoritative source. And then it's mentioned in an 11th century source. He basically does a whole study of this. And he concludes that there really isn't that much evidence to claim that Imam Hussein alayhi salam had any such daughter, that she was in Karbala, that she's buried in Sham. And so in the end, he says, فَإِنَّ مِنْ عَلَى هَذَا فَإِنَّ مِنْ غَيْرِ الْمُمْكِنِ إِبْدَاء رَأْيِ حَاسِمٍ حَوْلَ مَوْضُوعِ هَذِهِ الدِّرَاسَةِ إِسْتِنَادًا إِلَى الْمَصَادِرِ الرِّوَائِيَّةِ وَالتَّارِيخِيَّةِ. He says it's very difficult to give a decisive opinion with regard to this issue based on the narrative and historical sources. But he says there are certain karamat that have been witnessed and which are still being witnessed near the shrine, the blessed shrine of this particular character, Sayyidah Ruqayya. And so under any circumstance, he says that we should honor and show reverence to the shrine that is attributed to anyone from the Ahlul Bayt, because that is a necessary and essential obligation on us. But if you look at the details about the death of Sayyidah Ruqayya, then we have to say that لم ترد في أي من المصادر المعتبرة. None of the early or authentic and reliable sources mention anything about the death of Sayyidah Ruqayya or even of her existence as a daughter of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And so whosoever wants to mention the Masa'ib should do so knowing this. And whether the narrative is authentic or unreliable, this is all the responsibility for that is on the narrator. So basically, in this way, he goes on to shed some useful light on this. Other than that, there are some other fabricated narratives, such as, for example, say the Sakina salamullahi alayha. There is this narrative that when she was going to Sham, or when she was going from Kufa, or on the way, she fell from the camel, and Sayyidah Fatima, Zahra salamullahi alayha, miraculously appeared. So all of these miraculous appearances, obviously, they are ahistorical and they have no basis in the historical sources. Because if you will have read and this is something that even Ayatollah Sheikh Muhammad al-Rayshahri admits, he says, if you read the original and earliest eyewitness accounts of what happened in Karbala, you will be able to see that Allah's policy on the day of Karbala was to allow everything to happen naturally. There were no supernatural or miraculous interventions. if Allah was going to perform a miracle or do something supernaturally, he would have done it for the most important thing, which is to save the life of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So to say that he did not do it to save the life of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, but then he did it for other things like Sayyidah Sukaina falling down and sending Bibi Fatima to pick her up, or sending Imam Ali alayhi salam to meet Sayyidah Zainab, these are all ahistorical, unreliable, fabricated narratives that dishonor the memory of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And that is why the serious and strict scholars of hadith and rijal and history, they ask us to avoid going into these kinds of narratives. So with that, I think we come to an end for this bayan, and we open it up for questions. If any of you have any questions, I'm told by the admins that we will have a detailed question answer session for the entire series that we had this year, tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. But for today, pertaining to the incidents and the narratives that we have discussed tonight, if there are any questions, we can address them, inshallah ta'ala. I think we can start with we can start with you, brother.
Assalamu alaikum. I wanted to know if there was any involvement with Hindus in the Battle of Karbala. I've read on Hindu websites that there were Hindus involved.
Yes, this is a legend that has been circulated quite a lot in the recent years. There is talk about these Husseini Brahmins and some groups of Hindus who claim these kinds of things. But obviously, if you look at the earliest and most authoritative accounts, there is no such mention of any Hindus or any Indians being present in Karbala. Yeah, so these are claims that are very difficult to verify, and we cannot really view them as serious historical accounts, because the earliest and most authoritative sources that recorded all the details that we have about this incident do not make any mention or reference to any such group. So we can have from, I think we have a question from Hasnain Saab.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum, Doctor.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Very detailed view you have given, which we never knew all my life, almost 60 years. So, but I am wondering, Maulana, that when these actual narrations from early sources are already there, then why in the market so many fabrications, so many from every member, every gathering, thousands and thousands of people are attending, and they are being given this unnecessary, unauthentic narrations, and people are accepting this, and nobody is stopping them. In the whole world, this is going on, not only in Indian subcontinent, every Iran. You just mentioned this, even Canada and America, all these fabrications are going on in the huge scale. I am very much surprised, and I don't know how we will counter it. How you, me, I am really very much, I need to contact you, and we have to make some policy. We have to do something, otherwise whole fabrications and people are accepting this. They are, I don't know how we will tackle this. Just please give your view. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Jazakumullahu khairan, Al-Hajj Hasnain Sahab. Your insights and your words of sincere concern and are such that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward you for your concern and for your love for the truth and your support for the truth. I fully agree with you. This is really sad, and it's a disservice to the sacrifice of Imam Hussein alayhi salam that we should remember him and try to honor him by narrating lies or fabrications or imaginary folklore and legends about him, when in the earliest and most authoritative sources we do have true and authentic accounts of what actually happened in Karbala, instead of sharing those for the dhakirin and the people on the mimbar to share fabricated narratives. It is really sad. And unfortunately, this is the result of the culture, the general culture that has been created around Azadari. And this is what we have been addressing throughout this entire Muharram series that we had this year. We went into this whole concept that people have, that Azadari, and the best way to remember Imam Hussein alayhi salam is just to weep and wail and cry and shed tears and beat our chest. And people think that this is all that remembrance of Imam Hussein alayhi salam should be reduced to. This is what it should be all about. But the issue is Imam Hussein alayhi salam did not give that sacrifice at Karbala so that people should cry for him, or they should beat their chests, or they should engage in these kinds of mourning rituals. His goal was to revive the Quran and to revive the teachings and sunnah of his beloved grandfather, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But because we have been distracted from his goals, and we have set up crying and mourning and wailing and weeping as the goal, then the Zakirin find themselves under pressure that I have to make the people cry. And this is something that if you go back to the very first lecture that I delivered on the very first night, I brought to you the testimonies of some great scholars and researchers from the 12-er Imami Shia community who have admitted that the biggest reason for the proliferation of false narratives when it comes to the incident of Karbala is this culture that we have artificially built and constructed whereby we think that the greatest act of aza is crying for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So until you explain to the people that, look, crying is not a big deal. Even Umar ibn Sa'd was crying. You know, if you think that you can honor Imam Hussein alayhi salam and you can do justice to him just by shedding tears and crying and beating yourself up, you are mistaken. This is something anyone can do. Even the enemies did it. The question is, if you want to distinguish yourself, you distinguish yourself by doing something which no one but a true follower of Imam Hussein alayhi salam would do, which is continue his mission of reviving the Quran and Sunnah, reviving the Sunnah and fighting the Bid'ah. So yes, may Allah bless you and reward you for your sincere concern. And we hope, inshaAllah ta'ala, through these kinds of efforts and initiatives which are being supported by Islaah and by all of you, hopefully slowly and gradually we will build awareness and people will awaken to the fact that, look, yes, we shouldn't be honoring Imam Hussein alayhi salam by dishonoring his legacy and by smearing it with lies and fabrications. Rather, we should present the real historical Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and we should present the truth about him, and also work our hardest to renew his legacy and his mission. With that, yes, Hassanin Saab, you wanted to add something?
Yes. I want to just add one very important thing. You know, I have already seen so many videos from you, and this is one aspect you are handling right now. 10 days you have devoted on our Karbala issue. And another very important, more important than this, you have already handled and you are addressing this is shirk, right? Where you are refuting this divine power, right? This is already you are handling. Now, what I am going to ask you or tell you that there is a vicious circle with these narrations which are being exaggerated. Thousands, millions people are absorbing these narrations. Here also you have divine power. Now, this is adding to that shirk also. You know, when you are thinking that Imam Ali has come after this, so these are slowly poisoning the mind and it is adding to the shirk already in the market, right? So these both are acting together hand in hand, and what is happening, this is also taking away this Shia community away from other communities. They are saying, what is all these going? Nobody will come into Shia fold, and even Shia people will desert it. And this is happening. So this is really very vicious circle is going on. It is not easy to break. I tell you, doctor, it is not easy to break with these. We are nothing, drop in this ocean. Me and you, nothing. The scale on this slow poison is going on, I can tell you, very difficult. Some strategy has to be made, and then only we can take it. Thank you very much. God bless you. I am with you, doctor. I need to meet you, inshallah. I have to see you.
Inshallah. May Allah bless you as well. And I feel that with insights of experienced elders and wisdom from people like you, inshallah, we can collaborate together, we can work together to do something about this, to create awareness. I really like the term that you used, slow poison. Fabricated narratives are like slow poison, which are poisoning the minds and corrupting the minds of the people. And this is the exact same thing that Ayatollah Sheikh Muhammad Asif Mohseni also warns about, how fabrications can completely distort and disfigure the belief system of people, and how over the passage of time, false narratives end up becoming part of people's beliefs, and then they're not prepared for you to even question them or challenge them. So yes, definitely what you have said, this is definitely a concern that every person who has love for Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and love for the school of Ahlul Bayt, and love for the true Shi'ism, which is devotion and love and loyalty to the family of the Prophet, which is a perfume that every Muslim should have on him. Every person should be concerned about this, and we should all work together to combat these false narratives. With that, I would give the platform to Muhammad Qaim Hussein.
I was just saying that before I ask my question, I wanted to say that what Hussein Saab said was 100% relatable, and I've experienced this firsthand myself, all these exaggerated narratives which lead to shirk and ghulu. And yeah, my question was, is there any authenticity to the Ashura A'mal that we do? Most of the Shias do. Is there any authenticity to such practices? Like Ziyarat Ashura, the 4-unit prayer, and the La'an and Tabarri, and Dua Sajda, and Dua Al-Qama and all. Is there any authenticity to this?
Right. So as far as the authenticity is concerned, for A'mal Ashura or Ziyarat Ashura, these are, from a strict Rijali point of view, these are all inauthentic transmissions. And what is authentic in terms of A'mal and acts of worship for the day of Ashura is fasting, which was established as Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ from the time of the Prophet. And it was continued by the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam even after the event of Karbala. We have narrations, authentic narrations, which have been authenticated by Ayatollah Sayyid Abu Qasim al-Khu'i and Ayatollah Sheikh Muhammad Asif Mohseni. They are also authentic by the standards of Ayatollah Sayyid Ali al-Sistani. And these narrations make it very clear that Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam and Imam Sadiq alayhi salam promoted the fasting of the day of Ashura. Other than that, recital of the Quran, engaging in tasbih. If you were with us yesterday night, we mentioned from the earliest original maqtal the a'mal of Imam Hussein alayhi salam on the night of Ashura, which was tilawatul Quran, dua, istighfar, tasbih. These are the things that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt did on the night of Ashura, and this is what they would be doing before the fighting on the day of Ashura as well. And so this is the best way we can also walk in their footsteps.
Yeah, I wasn't there last night due to some circumstances. And
but the recording of that session has been broadcast, from what I've been told. It is
yes.
So yes. So you can see here we have presented, I've showcased the A'mal of Imam Hussein alayhi salam on the last night, because he asked specifically for that last night, because he told Al-Abbas that Allah knows how much I love to stand in prayer before my Creator, to converse with Him through dua, to make istighfar, to recite His book. So these are the a'mal that Imam Hussein alayhi salam did himself. And really, as we honor his memory, the best way to do it is walk on his footsteps, rather than follow innovated concepts or innovated rituals that were developed much later and whose authenticity and veracity is not established by strict standards.
And one of the examples of such practices is people do not greet each other on the day of Ashura. They do not say salam. And I had a row about this with some people in my family, and the mantiq they tried to give me was that when someone dies in your family, you don't greet people. I was like, who does that? But you don't greet people, you don't wish for the safety of their kin and them, you know. So that's why we do not say salam on this day. And I was like, Sayyid al-Sistani says this amal is ghayru sahih. So they couldn't refute Sayyid al-Sistani, but they refused to follow the marja. In this case, yeah.
Okay. But you see, salam is simply a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you make when you greet someone, and you say, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send peace on you. And there is no day of the life when we are not in need of peace from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even if it be a day when we have lost a loved one, there is nothing in the sunnah that says you should stop doing salam. In fact, the shuhada of Karbala themselves were doing salam to Imam Hussein alayhi salam on the day of Ashura, were they not? So there is no basis for this in any teaching of any imam. And as you rightly pointed out, Sayyid Ali as-Sistani has rejected this practice. And so yes, this belongs to the category of innovations that even learned traditional 12-hour Imami scholars would not encourage and promote. But sadly, the awam and the laity, they have a religion of their own. They have their own cultural superstitions and their own fads. And I think the only way is basically trying to persuade them very gently, very kindly, educating them, opening their mind about these things, reasoning with them logically the way you did, and explaining to them that, look, salam is a dua. When you recite salah, you are doing salam anyway, even on the day of Ashura, unless I imagine your family would not be from the Malangs. The Malangs maybe would not pray on the day of Ashura, they don't pray, but everyone else, most of the practicing 12-hour Imamiyah, they do pray on the day of Ashura. So when you pray, when you offer salah, whether it is Salatul Fajr or Salatul Zuhur or Asr, you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu when you open your prayer. You say Assalamu alayna wa ala ibadillahi salihin. So when you are doing salam in salah, you are doing it anyway on the day of Ashura, are you not? So in that sense, there is just no basis, even logically, for not doing salam outside salah on the day of Ashura. I come back to Brother Isa. Do you have a question?
Yes. What books would you recommend, or lectures that have been translated in English or even Spanish about the topic of Karbala and Imam Hussein alayhi salam?
As far as material in English is concerned, there is always the issue of authenticity and reliability. The best studies of Rijal and Hadith are usually available in Arabic. And so it's difficult to recommend a decisive source in English. But perhaps you could try if you can find an edition of the Maqtal of Abu Mikhnaf, which is available, but which is based on an accurate reconstruction of what Ibn Jarir al-Tabari preserved. And so you can go for that. Or you can, Tarikh al-Tabari itself has been translated into English now. And I think you can find the volumes of Tarikh al-Tabari online. And via Tarikh al-Tabari, you can access the Maqtal of Abu Mikhnaf, the parts of which have been preserved by Ibn Jarir al-Tabari. So that would be a good resource. You can go to Tarikh al-Tabari, access the English translation, and read the accounts of Abu Mikhnaf. That would be one place. The other work that has been attempted in this regard to authenticate the events of Karbala is by Ayatollah Sheikh Muhammad al-Rayshahri. Although he is a traditional 12-hour Imami scholar, but he is quite strict when it comes to matters of historicity. So his tahqiq is much better and much more reliable than what you will hear from the Mimbar. So his work has been translated into English as Chronicles of Karbala, but I've not seen the English translation. I do have the original Arabic, and as you can see, the original Arabic is entitled الصحيح من مقتل سيد الشهداء وأصحابه by Sheikh Muhammad al-Rayshahri. This is in 1550 pages. He has gone into a lot of discussions, a lot of side discussions, details, and he has collected all the available resources. But what he does, he doesn't authenticate every event that he mentions in this maqtal. Rather, he will narrate an incident and then tell you this is what the earliest and most authoritative, authentic sources say, and then this is what the later sources say. And generally speaking, he is quite dismissive of what the later sources say. Because obviously, if something is not mentioned in the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century sources, or 4th or even 4th and 5th century sources, and all of a sudden, miraculously, you have this report surfacing in the 7th or 8th century, claiming that something happened in Karbala, when no historical source in the earlier period captured it, then that is usually seen by strict scholars of Rijal and history as a sign of fabrication. So, yes, I would say that there is a dearth of reliable material in English, but this is why at Islaah we are working very hard to try and make sure that we make more and more of these Arabic materials available in English through sessions like this, through lectures, and also, inshallah, there is a website that is currently under development where a lot of this material will be translated and showcased. With that being said, there is one question from Brother Hussein. He says, Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The narrations that come of Sayyidah Sakina having a dream of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and dying the next day, where do these come from? Also, will you be covering the events of the Ahlul Bayt in the courtyard of Yazid? So, with regard to Sayyidah Sakina salamullahi alayha dying in Sham, this is actually denied by Ayatollah Sheikh Rayshahri. He says there is no evidence for this. In fact, all the earliest reliable, authoritative, authentic sources indicate that Sayyidah Sakina salamullahi alayha survived the event of Karbala. She survived Kufa, she survived Sham, she went back to Medina, she lived there, and historical sources say she died in the year 117 AH in Medina, and she was buried in Medina. So where do these reports about her seeing her father in a dream and dying in Sham? So as I showed you before, these are coming from sources that were written 7 centuries, 8 centuries later. And this is why they are not trusted by serious and sincere scholars of Hadith and Rijal. With regard to the events and what transpired in Kufa and also in Sham, inshallah, if there is interest in this, we may cover this during the Arba'in period, during the Chehlum of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. If we have sessions in those days and nights, we can go through those events, inshallah, or maybe even before that, depending on what the admins decide, inshallah. If there are no further questions, I think we can. We have a question from Brother Muhammad Uda.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Shaykhna. This question is not really on topic, but I also don't really want to have an answer. Just see if you have a reference to one of your videos where you can answer it. Is that okay if I can proceed?
Okay.
Jazakumullah. Basically, I was in a big state of hayra, and alhamdulillah, I have answered many of my questions. The thing that has remained is, as you've established before, the concept of divine imama is not true, as we've seen from Imam Ali alayhi salam. The thing is, if that's not the appropriate way to go with it, on what objective and non-circular reasoning basis does the Imams of Ahlul Bayt claim that they're the most appropriate to be the Khalifa? And I personally, in my heart, I believe they are, but just like on an objective way, how can you prove it? You understand the question?
Right. So this is something that Shia and Sunni scholarship, at least the learned Sunni scholarship, is also agreed on, that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, particularly Imam Ali alayhi salam, and also Imam Hassan alayhi salam and Imam Hussein alayhi salam, they consider themselves more worthy than anyone else in the Ummah to lead the Prophet, to lead the Ummah, after the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But then if you look at the earliest understandings within the Shias, if you look at the earliest sources, the argument that Imam Ali alayhi salam makes and that Imam Hassan alayhi salam and Imam Hussein alayhi salam make is they argue on the basis of the track record of Imam Ali alayhi salam, his long service to Islam, his jihad, his closeness to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Because remember, when Abu Bakr got the votes, or he got the bay'ah at Saqifa, on what grounds did he get it? He got it on grounds that he argued together with Umar and Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. He said, we are Quraysh, right? We are the tribe of the Prophet. So with this argument, they defeated the Ansar. But the Banu Hashim, if they had been present in Saqifa, they would have defeated the Shaykhain and anyone else who would try to stand up by saying that, okay, you are from Quraysh, but we are from Banu Hashim. We are much closer to the Prophet. We have been trained by the Prophet. We have knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah. And the Holy Prophet mentioned so many recommendations about us, right? So all of the ahadith of prophetic fada'il, in which the Prophet talks about the greatness of Imam Ali alayhi salam. So basically what you will see is that there are two ways that have been followed, two models for proving the ahaqqiyya and awlawiyya of the Ahlul Bayt to succeed the Prophet. One is the model that the Ahlul Bayt themselves use, which is to argue from merits, that our merits entitle us to succeed the Prophet after him. But later on, within the sectarian paradigm, among the Imamiyya and also among the Zaydiyya and among the Ismailiyya as well, all these splinter groups, you have this concept of nas, and you have this concept that no, they were actually appointed by the Prophet ﷺ, and it was a divine appointment, and that is why they should have succeeded the Prophet. Now for us, we believe that we should follow the historical position of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, which they publicly disseminated. And because we don't see them claiming that Allah or the Messenger has appointed them, but rather we see them arguing from their merits, then we also stick to this approach for arguing their awlawiyya and their ahaqqiyya.
I understand. I see the point, that they're even closer than those Quraysh, and then the Quraysh who claim they're close.
Yes,
because
and
when
this
you
is why,
brought the
This is why Imam Ali alayhi salam, some people say that, why was he upset? For 6 months he did not give bay'ah. Remember? So the whole reason why Imam Ali alayhi salam was upset, the lay Shia think that he was upset because people had not followed a divine appointment. That he thought that Allah and the Prophet have appointed me, and people have ignored this appointment, so that's why I'm upset. If that is the case, even after 6 months, he would not give bay'ah. Because if it is an appointment of Allah, then it will be part of the deen, it will be part of the aqidah, and Imam Ali alayhi salam would have to fight for it, just as Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam fought for his risala. The Prophet was never prepared to give up his risala, right? But in the case of Imam Ali alayhi salam, he was upset for the first 6 months because he was not given a chance to be part of the shura that elected the first caliph. He and the Banu Hashim were busy with the burial of the Prophet, and at this time, the event of Saqifa happened, and in a haste and in a rush, they quickly elected someone without consulting the Banu Hashim and the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet. So this is why Imam Ali was very upset. Not only he was upset, the Ahlul Bayt were upset, the Banu Hashim were upset, many of the Muhajirin were upset, and even some of the Ansar were upset. But later on, Imam Ali alayhi salam himself explains, he says, I realized that if I keep on remaining displeased and upset, and I do not support the newly formed government, then the enemies of Islam will take advantage of this. They will attack, because they will say that this is a government that is so weak, it does not even have the support of the family of the Prophet in whose name it has been formed. And so they would then use this as an excuse to attack the city-state of Medina, and Imam Ali alayhi salam did not want that to happen. So he finally reconciled with the Shaykhain, he buried the hatchet, And he said, in the interest of Islam, I support your government from now on.
I see. Regarding the hadith where the Prophet, I don't remember it exactly. You probably know it better than me, but where Ali raised his hand and said that I will be, I don't remember it, but your brother, your wasi, and your khalifa. Have you heard of that one? These three
Right.
things. Is that not authentic, given the fact that Imam Ali alayhi salam didn't take the khilaf right away when the people elected him?
Right. So you're referring to the incident of Da'wat Dhul Ashira?
I think it's that.
Yeah. So that narration is actually not considered to be authentic. Even
Not authentic.
it's there in Tarikh al-Tabari, but by Rijali standards, there are some liars in the chain of that narration. So, and also logically, Da'wat Dhul Ashira was held in Makkah when people were not even willing to accept Risala, right? When they're not willing to accept Risala, how can the Holy Prophet announce the next thing, which is his successorship, when his own rule has not been fully accepted? He is being persecuted, he's being tortured, his followers are being pursued. So yeah, this is an ahistorical account.
Jazakumullah, Sheikhna. You've really cleared up many of my questions. I was in a big state of hayra. All thanks and praise to you. Thank you, after Allah, of course. Jazakumullah.
Fikum, barakallahu fikum.
Barakallah, ma'as-salam.
Right, so there is one more question from Brother Ja'far. He's saying, Salam, I was in a majlis and the reciter mentioned you saying that you are calling for Islaah deen, and yet Imam alayhi salam Islaah was to the Ummah. Please clarify for us. Shukran. No, we are not calling for Islaah of the, we are calling for Islaah in deen. The religion of Islam is not in need of Islaah. What is in need of Islaah is the Ummah and the Ummah's understanding of Islam, which gets distorted with the passage of time. And so where the Islah and the reform and the revival is needed is in people's perception, in people's understanding. The deen of Allah is perfect, and it has been perfectly preserved in the Quran. It has been mass transmitted through the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And yes, in the time of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, it was the Ummah of the Holy Prophet ﷺ which was in need of a certain kind of reform, which was at the level of political reform, because the Shura system had been abolished by the Banu Umayyah, and they had basically instituted a hereditary monarchical system. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam was opposed to that. He wanted to revive the actual Islamic system. But even today, the Ummah will always remain in need of reform until the Day of Judgment, so long as there are people who are bringing in false narratives, who are preaching against the Quran and the Sunnah. There will always be need for us to reform and to revive the actual teachings of Islam. With that, I think we have answered the questions that were put before us tonight. Inshallah, the Islaah admins, I think, have confirmed that tomorrow night they're going to have a special Q&A session. We won't be having a lecture, but an exclusive Q&A session where opportunity will be given to our attendees to ask more of their questions, especially pertaining to the series that we just had. And inshallah, I look forward to seeing you then. بإذنه تعالى. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.